Oh, hello everyone. A year from right now, I want to share with you a sentimental journey that I will be going on. My husband and I will be leaving in May of 2023 to go to Vladivostok, Siberia. Now, you might be asking yourself, why Vladivostok, Siberia? And that is a good question. And here's why. In the late 1800s, my grandmother and grandfather picked up their roots, left their farmhouse in Berwick, Maine, and traveled halfway around the world to Vladivostok, Siberia, where my grandfather and his brother were setting up an import-export business. They were the first Americans to set up a business and establish themselves in this Russian port city in the far east of Russia. Hard to imagine how my grandparents not only made this decision, but what they had to go through to get there. A train ride across the whole United States, then on a ship, and then finally, I guess, another train up to Vladivostok, where they landed in their new homeland, this village that they were complete strangers in, and they didn't even speak the language. Now, how do you like that for being intrepid travelers? From 1894 to 1930, my grandmother lived and thrived in Vladivostok. Fortunately for us, Granny was a prolific letter writer. Letters were sent home to her loved ones almost every day. Granny's letter are the late 18th century equivalent of an internet blogger, dedicated to her subject matter, which was her new home in Vladivostok. By reading her correspondence, her descendants learned about her life and the history of the town in Siberia where she resided, the perspective of an American as she became acquainted with her brand new and faraway homeland. Not only was my grandmother a prolific letter writer, and thank goodness for that because of the history of her life that it provided, but she was also an amazing photographer. Now think of this. Way back in the late 1800s, to have a camera was really something special. To be able to take beautiful pictures and then develop them was quite something else. But my grandmother loved photography, and she took lots and lots of pictures, which she sent back with her letters to her family in Maine. And what's interesting is that the photographs that she took are some of the only known images of that day and time in Russia in the late 1800s and early 1900s. As a result, all these letters and photographs are now housed in the United States Library of Congress, where they will remain in perpetuity for future generations to know about life in Siberia in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Oh, and I just think that is a wonderful contribution my grandmother made to the history of the world, really and truly. And she lived through very historic times. She lived through the Russian Revolution. She had no fear. It was remarkable the way she ignored and really treated the Bolsheviks, that not a single one of them touched her. She got away with whatever she wanted to do and whatever she wanted to say. She was an independent woman, and they left her alone, and that was probably good for them. The life of my grandmother, let alone her legacy of words and images, is not widely known in her hometown of Berwick, Maine. But in Vladivostok, she is celebrated for providing an opportunity for the city to rediscover a piece of their history that was long gone due to war and the Russian Revolution. The people in Vladivostok, they loved my grandmother. Here's some pictures. This is when she arrived. This is when my mother was born. That's my mother. And here's Granny when she left Vladivostok in 1933. Here's a picture in front of their dacha in the late 1900s, which I just love these old black and white pictures, don't you? I love the contrast. I don't know, they're just very interesting. And here's a social gathering in the veranda room of Dom Smith. That was the name of the business that my grandparents established there in Vladivostok. How do you like this? A stroll through the woods in long skirts. Can you imagine how? Well, I guess they must have gotten used to it because my grandmother loved the outdoors and they were always hiking everywhere. And here they're taking a break sitting on the side of a bridge. Here's another picture of my grandmother. Oh, there she is right there in the front row on the right. I love seeing how the old decorations were. The old interior decorating, I guess you'd call it. The late 1800s in Russia. And here's a dacha with the Pray family and the servants posed on the front porch. And that was their second house that was outside of Vladivostok. So, after all those years and all those letters and all those photographs, the darling, wonderful people of Vladivostok decided that they were going to do something special in my grandmother's memory. The Arsenov State Museum in Vladivostok a decade ago opened an exhibit about my grandparents' life in this port city that remains popular with visitors to this day. Curators are planning another opening of a much larger exhibit in my grandparents' house, the actual house they lived in, up on a hill overlooking the Bay of Gold Horn, which my grandmother thought that was one of the most beautiful sights she had ever seen anywhere in the world. So not only did they honor my grandmother with this exhibit in this museum, but look at this. Granny Pray was sculpted into a statue by an extraordinary sculptor from St. Petersburg. In her hand is a letter clutched to her chest, as though she is just walking down the steps to the nearby post office. I just think this is such a beautiful, beautiful statue in so many ways. And I'm so touched that the people of Vladivostok decided to honor her in this way, in perpetuity. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And the great part was that she made her life in Vladivostok, and I don't think she would have gone home or traded what she had there for the world. She ended up absolutely loving Vladivostok. So they honored her, and when this statue was unveiled, it was actually the 4th of July in 2014. Another thing is that we don't know, but we think this is the only statue of an American in Russia. If anybody knows something different from that, please send me a comment in the comment section below. But as far as we know, Granny Pray is the only American honored with a beautiful statue. So I can't imagine what my emotions will be next year when I walk up to this statue and see it in person. Oh, what a thrill that will be. A grandmother I love dearly, but lost when I was just 14. Fond and cherished memories live on as I think back on this amazing life of this woman who I called Granny. So I'm going to go on with some other information that I pulled off the internet because I thought it was interesting. It was some comments that were translated from Russian into English so that people looking at my grandmother's history could see what they wrote. And here's the first one. Eleanor Pray is an American who fell in love with through many of her letters in which she described Vladivostok at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. She lived in our city for 36 years and despite the difficult years, could not imagine her life without Vladivostok. In her letters, she created a chronicle of the life of that time. Eleanor also took 1,000 pictures of the city, many of which are unique. Here's the next one. Eleanor Pray became famous for sending several thousand letters to her relatives in America and in Shanghai. She moved to Shanghai in 1930 because that's where my mother was living, because she married my father, an American doctor who had a really big practice there on the Bund in Shanghai. My mother was really insistent that she leave Vladivostok, but it was like pulling teeth. My grandmother didn't want to leave. Anyway, from which this citation goes on to say, from which contemporaries learned many facts about life in Vladivostok in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that they would not have known. And if you go up to Pochtabaya Lane, you will see the house in which she lived. All right, here's the last one. Pleasant words of the most worthy resident of Vladivostok. Thanks to her and those who published her unique letters for the wonderful and truthful book about the best time that was lived all those years ago. Thanks to those who have now, including Eleanor Pray, have immortalized our city. And she is the patriot of our city. I thought those were just all very wonderful, appreciative comments about what my grandmother had done. But, it was not an easy life for her. I mean, she survived the Russian-Japanese War from 1904 to 1905, the First World War, the Revolution, the Intervention. And unfortunately, it was here in Vladivostok that my dearly beloved grandfather died in 1923. Instead of departing Vladivostok, Granny decided to stay. She did not return to America. She went to work as an accountant in a trading house known as Kunst and Albers, and worked there until 1930, until the company ceased to exist. Only when she had nothing left to live on, she moved to China, from where several years later she was interned by the Japanese in a prison camp there. Remarkable life. But my Granny Pray was just such an interesting, wonderful woman. I just am so proud to call her my grandmother. And this really sums it all up about how she felt about Vladivostok. And I quote, "It's unlikely that someone loves this unintended place like me. Everyone laughs at me, and I cannot help myself. The only thought is that I can live somewhere where I will not see this blue bay, the Golden Horn, and two gulfs, Amur and Ussuri, terrifies me." My grandmother, what became a white Russian, through and through, she learned to speak the Russian language, read it, write it, and embraced it in every way, shape, and form. And what a legacy she has left for our family to pass down for all the generations yet to come. I, for one, am just so thrilled to be able to tell you about my intrepid, incredible, interesting, fascinating, one-of-a-kind grandmother who I absolutely love dearly. And I will leave you all with this picture of me sitting. Well, you know what? I've got some other pictures I forgot to show you, so I'm going to do those first. Here's a picture of my grandmother wearing an evening dress for a ball on the Russian Imperial Navy's vessel Kornilov in May 1896, celebrating the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II. Here are my grandparents sitting in the veranda room. It's fun to see how those old rooms were decorated. Here my grandfather is on the right with his friends. I don't know what they're reading, but they look intense and having a good time. And here is my grandmother sitting down and my grandfather behind her, and Sarah Smith, her sister-in-law, and I'm not sure exactly who Natalie was. Here's a picture of my grandmother and grandfather in front of a decorative screen at the Dom Smith shop in Vladivostok. They all love playing pool, including my grandmother, and here's the billiard table inside the store, which is one of their favorite pastimes. I love this relaxed picture of my Granny Pray and my grandfather Fred. Oh, I wish I could have met him. He was just an extraordinary man from all reports. And here's my grandmother on the left with her sister-in-law in the middle, and I don't know who the woman is on the right. And this is quite a picture. Here's an early tennis court with tennis players. Can you imagine running around a tennis court in those long skirts? That would be quite a feat. I wonder how many people tripped over their skirts, but it's a wonderful and historic picture from the turn of the century. And here's my grandmother out and about with the camera in her house. She was all over Vladivostok taking pictures. That was her favorite pastime, along with writing letters, and she did both in great volumes. And this is a picture of the view from my grandparents' house overlooking the bay of Vladivostok, the Golden Horn Bay. And here's my grandmother in an ancient picture with Sarah Smith, her sister-in-law. I don't know who the gentleman is, but they're on the Trans-Siberian train, which to this day, its last stop or its first stop is in Vladivostok. That's something I'd really like to do. Whether I'll ever get to it at my age, who knows? And this is Dom Smith's, this is her brother-in-law's house in Vladivostok. And last but not least, a picture of me sitting on the lap of my grandmother all those years ago. How I miss her. How I wish I could talk to her right now about all of her experiences. But thank the good Lord that we have her photographs and letters that give us a really good sense of her life in Vladivostok, halfway around the world. And I can't wait to quote unquote see her again when I wrap my arms around that statue in that square in downtown Vladivostok, Siberia.